Yanze Khenpo Sodargye Loner Molam Khenpo Sodargye Bangar Dangon Zanto Shirmurdo Tomba Dikji Janla Gi Shamsar Nachar Wazergi Jagamsar Jawar Tiki Jano Yila Jimmy Benzo Zhang Lang Sorande Gurti Toban Pora Shinjilo.
Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching. Today we are going to continue our discussion of the Sigalovada Sutra. Yesterday we talked about the eastern direction, among the 6 directions in the Sigalovada Sutra. The topic we were just discussing was centered on the relationship between parents and their children. Additionally, the guiding principles on how to best navigate these relationships have already been explained in detail. That part has been fully covered. Today we will begin our discussion on the dynamic between teachers and students. To put it another way, we are referring to the very important relationship that exists between teachers and their students. We will now proceed to interpret this specific dynamic from the valuable perspective offered by Buddhism. Within this framework, among the 6 directions mentioned in the teachings, the south place of reverence, or in other words, the second key element, is the teacher. In the journey of our lives, teachers are profoundly important, imparting crucial knowledge. Consequently, when it comes to taking on the role of a disciple or a student, so how should we show our respect and properly serve our esteemed teachers? Or, to put it another way, what is the correct attitude we should hold when learning from our teachers? This is, without a doubt, a very important and essential aspect that impacts our lives, especially for us as Buddhists who are dedicated to the path of learning and cultivation. What should the Buddhist perspective be? Regarding the relationship between teachers and students, or if one is not a Buddhist, they can also conduct their own independent research, or, driven simply out of curiosity, they can observe the world for themselves. How does Buddhism view the relationship between teachers and students? This principle is the same for us here as well. Buddhism also has its own set of requirements for students who wish to learn, and in a similar way, Buddhism also sets forth certain conditions for the teachers. Just like what we studied before in the words of my perfect teacher, as well as finding comfort and ease in the nature of mind, and also some texts we haven't formally studied before, which cite many scriptural sources, including the treasury of precious qualities and the wish-fulfilling treasury. In many of these sacred scriptures, when discussing the topic of teachers, and more specifically spiritual teachers, it is clearly stated that there are a great many important characteristics or essential requirements for them. This is in contrast to what is expected of worldly teachers. Teachers of the exoteric tradition and teachers of the esoteric tradition each has different requirements. Likewise, it is important to understand that students also have their own set of criteria. So what are the characteristics and requirements of a good student? And conversely, what are the conditions that might define a bad student? So these fundamental principles are explained in a very clear and detailed manner. Therefore, for those of us who are studying or practicing Buddhism, it is very important for us to understand these core principles. Otherwise, some of us may find that we can only claim to be Buddhists in name only. But in reality, we have no understanding of Buddhist teachings at all. This is indeed a very regrettable situation. Therefore, it is important that we continue to study in this particular way over the long term. At the very least, this should be done on a daily basis. If we can grasp certain specific points or principles, then gradually, step by step, in the end, just like individual drops of water merging together into the vast ocean, we accumulate knowledge, and eventually we ourselves become wise. So, what are we going to talk about today? We will be exploring a teaching from the Buddha. The Buddha explained to Shansheng that as a disciple, there are 5 ways to show respect to one's teachers. So, what are these 5 things? The first is to provide for what the teacher needs, essentially serving them. Second, paying respect and making offerings. Let me explain each one individually. It's okay that we don't read them all at once. First of all, as a devoted disciple, as a student, you can also say, as a disciple, you can also say that in the process of serving and relying on a teacher or guru, there are these 5 conditions. First, the disciple should provide what is needed for service. In the presence of one's teacher, a student should be prepared to serve them by using their own physical body and through their own helpful actions. Whatever the teacher needs, you should do it. For example, whether the teacher requires water to be fetched or their meals to be cooked, and this is a very common practice in our Tibetan region, students often provide assistance to their teachers in numerous ways. This includes helping with various physical tasks, such as carrying classroom items, chopping wood, digging the ground for planting or planting grass, and other similar activities. In essence, any task that can be accomplished through one's own physical body and actions is considered a valuable act of service. As a student, one should certainly do the same for their teacher as well. In the teachings of Buddhism, it is said that the absolute highest offering is indeed the offering of the Dharma. The middle level of practice involves serving and making offerings by using one's own body to perform helpful actions. Below that, the lowest form of offering is the material offering, which consists of offering money or other physical resources. This is generally the way this concept is explained within the Buddhist scriptures as well. So this is considered to be the second type, essentially providing what is needed for the service. Whatever is needed, you should do it. It's not that when the teacher needs something, you can just completely ignore it. You see, that is not a very good approach either. This is the first point to consider, and the second point is the idea of respectful offering. This form of offering is essentially the same as the material offering we discussed previously. The teacher is considered the very source of wisdom and is also the one who generously imparts that wisdom directly to us. Therefore, from our perspective as their students, the kindness they show is truly immense. Therefore, to the best of our ability, if we happen to possess some amount of wealth, we should offer it to the teacher. Of course, the situation is certainly a bit different between ancient times and the present day. Nowadays, when we talk about teachers, whether we are talking about in the East or in the West, some of these examples can be found within schools. And as for the schools themselves, regarding the different kinds of schools, some function as private institutions, while others are public schools. Financially, teachers will generally receive a salary or wages, and students are typically required to pay tuition fees to attend. After that, people feel that it's only natural. Of course, if you pay the tuition fees as a substitute, that might be considered acceptable as well, but there's actually another way you could do it. Nowadays, in the process of spreading knowledge, we very often encounter this particular situation. Maybe it's just in recent years, and certainly in the past few years, there have been many online courses and online classes, so this is also a factor to consider. Some people say it should be free of charge. But if it's provided completely for free, it might be very difficult to achieve. This is because whether it's some dedicated Buddhist volunteers or other similar charitable groups, if all of this is really completely free of charge, then these people also need to make a living. Whether it is the dedicated teachers or the many other wonderful volunteers, if they need to survive, well then, in the long run, if this specific type of work is going to be done completely for free, unless the person has relatively abundant resources themselves, it is actually very difficult to keep everything going. Therefore, charging what we believe is a reasonable fee, I think, is justified. And if everything is given away for free as a form of making connections, if everything is free, then there may be certain difficulties. Of course, when it comes to some of the free courses offered within Buddhism, the situation is completely different. In these instances, you will find that there are dedicated volunteers who offer their time and services without charge, and their work is also driven by a special kind of deeply held faith. And so if no money is charged here, then it can be fully sustained. However, when it comes to some of the teachers' classes in the secular world, if absolutely everything has to be free, it's quite possible that such an endeavor won't be sustainable for a very long time. As a comparable example, even in Buddhism in the present day, some people often have to volunteer their time and effort for free and engage in complementary activities in order to make connections. Of course, if this can be sustained long term, it's wonderful. But this is probably just an initial stage, and we should say the initial motivation is very good. But the later motivation and the physical commitment may not necessarily be able to continue. So sometimes, including, for instance, some of the tools we use to spread culture and some of the books used to spread culture as well, it is important that they have a proper, established way to operate. Through this approach, the continuity of such a culture, I think, can be sustained in the long run. Otherwise, if everything is simply left to be free and unregulated for a while, its future becomes uncertain. In many situations, people find it difficult to accept, and this is especially true among certain groups in the West, where hearing that something is completely free of charge can often make them feel a bit skeptical and uneasy. Why is this free? If it's offered for free, does that automatically mean the cost is waived? But does it perhaps contain other advertising content? Or even though there is no direct monetary cost, are there other hidden prices? So could there be some kind of ulterior motive at play here? Perhaps they are trying to build up their reputation, or is it possible they're gaining some other form of intangible benefit from all of their actions? There are such concerns. So of course, we can't rule this out either. In some particular places, it is certainly true that this might indeed be the case. Therefore, this particular kind of support is genuinely and profoundly important for us, especially considering the challenging current situation we find ourselves in as we navigate a world that is profoundly shaped by consumer culture and an overwhelming emphasis on materialism. Well, if everything relies on being free, I personally do not think that is necessarily a particularly good thing. Of course, as students, whether it's the direct source of your wisdom, such as your respected teachers, or the foundational source of your learning, like your beloved alma mater, it is a good practice to remember them and occasionally show your genuine concern and gratitude. I have seen that in some Western educational institutions, after having studied at these schools in the past, when they later become quite successful and well known, it often seems that once they have accumulated some wealth and developed their abilities, at that time they would often make donations. And then they often go back to their schools to give back. For example, they might donate a new building to the school or provide support for a wide range of charitable projects that benefit the institution. You can also see some well-known celebrities who graduated from these same schools taking part in these efforts. After all, they have a certain feeling toward it. This is my cherished alma mater, a place where I have always felt I belong. I had the privilege of studying here, and this feeling of connection remains, whether it's for my former teachers or for the alma mater itself. They have a sense of gratitude. It's the same in Buddhism. For example, if you studied at a Buddhist institute, or if you lived in a monastery, or if you were ordained at a certain temple, once you have managed to gain a great deal of prestige, or alternatively, if you possess a certain significant amount of influence, not only is it important for the purpose of spreading the valuable academic culture you absorbed, but it is also crucial that you don't forget your alma mater where you once studied, especially in terms of the extensive professional network and other valuable resources it continues to offer. As long as you have the opportunity, you should probably give back as well. Otherwise, some Buddhists seem to hold the belief that all of their spiritual wisdom and worldly wealth must be sourced from a single specific Buddhist institute or one particular monastery. But in reality, after you grow up and mature in your practice, when you didn't have any wings at all before, and finally, after your wings have grown so very strong and you soar freely in the vast blue sky, from then on you never look back. From the perspective of worldly character and our inner conscience, there may be some important aspects here that are truly worthy of deep reflection. So I also sincerely hope that everyone present with us here today, including some of the respected Dharma teachers among us, no matter what your past experience was in a certain place, whether it was good or challenging, you should always maintain a sense of gratitude toward that place, and especially toward that Dharma center where you practiced. This gratitude is something to carry with you even into the future. I've noticed that sometimes, for example, in Hong Kong, many of the roads in some schools are actually donated by certain extremely famous people. Later, you find out that they once studied at that art school. It turns out that he once studied in the Chinese department there. So later, after he achieved success in the world, he felt this sense of gratitude. This is speaking from the perspective of his wealth. But we should also reflect on this in other aspects as well. This is a respectful offering. It is an offering made specifically to the teacher. Now for the third point, which is about respect and admiration. This particular point should be considered from the perspective of our own personal conduct. We should always maintain a great and profound respect for our teachers. We truly ought to cherish their work and look up to them, because it is so important to have such an attitude. And it's not just about the so-called title of teacher. They are merely a tool for the expansion of my knowledge. They are completely on equal footing with me. If that's the case, it seems like actually the transmission of some knowledge requires a certain cause and condition. In the past, there was a great master named Gokangba who said, "The teacher is the best condition for imparting knowledge." There is a principle of dependent origination at work here. If you show great respect to your teacher or instructor, if you are especially reverent, the knowledge within their mind stream will quite naturally transfer into your own mind stream. On the other hand, if from the very beginning you continue to look down on them with disdain, or even feel a sense of dislike, Or if you frequently develop wrong views about them and have not the slightest sense of reverence for this person, then it is impossible for them to bring you any wisdom. That's why we often mention in the Treasury of Precious Qualities, it is said that one should always regard the teacher as a precious musk deer and their profound teachings as the valuable musk. If not, such a person is said to have the 4 kinds of wrong views. Everyone should absolutely make a point to remember this as well. If you only try to extract the knowledge from the teacher's mind stream, but do not acknowledge or respect the person at all, and they will even quite often speak ill of them behind their back, then the knowledge of such a person will bring no benefit to your own mind stream. Consequently, in the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, this is how I see it, there is a special kind of love that exists between a teacher and student. What kind of love is it? The teacher truly has a very, very deep and abiding love for the student. All the knowledge he possesses, he imparts this knowledge to you without holding anything back. As for the student, for them, even the simple act of hearing the teacher's name is enough to inspire a profound feeling of reverence. I once saw a Khenpo, for instance, and every time he mentioned his guru's name, sometimes I feel that I have respect for my teachers. But when I saw another Khenpo, I noticed that whenever he mentioned his teacher's name, he would immediately become truly and completely overwhelmed with tears, every single time, without fail. So later on I started to pay attention to this. Whenever I was in front of him, I would avoid mentioning anything related to that. Otherwise he would end up crying for a long time again, and then it would be hard to continue talking about anything else. So I tried my best to avoid it. At first I didn't understand why. Every time I wondered why he was crying. Later I realized that as soon as his teacher's name was mentioned, he would just naturally start to cry, as if the tears were already welling up, just waiting there in his eyes. Very quickly they would start to fall, one drop after another. So later on, whenever we talked about certain things, I just really wouldn't bring it up anymore. This kind of feeling, this deep sense of gratitude toward his teacher was especially characterized by a truly natural sense of respect. As a direct consequence of this, he was genuinely able to obtain a very real and substantial benefit. Fourth, when the teacher gives instructions, one should respect and follow them without disobedience. Whether it's a teacher or a spiritual master, whenever they impart any valuable teachings or instructions, one should be sure to follow and diligently put them into practice with the greatest possible respect. Never go against them. Follow the teachings faithfully. This is what we often refer to as following the teachings faithfully. In our worldly life, when we talk about being a disciple, it's like what is described in the Essentials of the Shakyamuni's Teachings. The Essentials of the Shakyamuni's Teachings is a text compiled by a great master in China. He also included a great number of Buddhist teachings from India and said, "Those who study after me are called disciples, and those whose understanding arises from me are called sons." So what do disciple and son mean? From the perspective of knowledge and learning, it is fundamentally important that a teacher's own knowledge is truly extensive. Regarding the term son, in the context of the arising of wisdom, the student is considered to be very much like the teacher's own child, as the teacher is guiding their spiritual development. Therefore, it is crucial that true students or disciples, when it comes to the lessons and instructions that the teacher imparts, or what the spiritual master teaches, they should do their absolute utmost to follow and completely obey. After listening carefully, they understand that they dare not go against it. They then carry out the teacher's instructions precisely as they were spoken. In this way, it is extremely beneficial for oneself. So what is the last point? The last point is to listen to the Dharma from the teacher and to remember and uphold it well, never forgetting it. Any worldly or transcendental teachings that are received from the teacher, and all the teachings that are heard, they should be recorded completely and in full, making sure you are not missing even a single word. If one has a good memory, then all of it should be remembered in the heart. In the past, many Indian arhats and great masters would faithfully and completely record all of the Buddha's vast and profound teachings without leaving anything out. Later on, some other great masters, they also diligently recorded every single word of their root teacher's instructions, not letting a single word slip away. They would meticulously write everything down in full. It is for this reason that today we also have many of these valuable records, such as the well-known words of my perfect teacher and a guide to the words of my perfect teacher, as well as a great many transcripts of teachings from various esteemed masters. When the masters taught at that time, these were subsequently recorded. As disciples, we should record everything from our masters or teachers, even down to their jokes. Everything should be written down. Later on, when we ourselves are actively spreading their authentic Dharma and profound knowledge, we can then say, my teacher at that particular time, when he was teaching this to us, this was his expression, and this was the content of what he taught. All of it can be recounted, down to the most minute detail. Therefore, to listen to the Dharma from a teacher and retain it well without forgetting, in the Sigalovada Sutra, this is also very important. All of us here today are people who truly love knowledge and learning. Therefore, as much as possible, whether it's the profound teachings of the great masters of the past or the invaluable and direct instructions from our own esteemed lineage teachers, we should try our best to record them. If we record them like this, perhaps in a very short amount of time, they will prove to be extremely useful for all of us. If you can't use them right away, then maybe in about 10 or even 20 years from now, you will definitely still make use of them at some point in your lifetime. So I truly believe that this particular capability is going to be extremely useful. Therefore, we, in our capacity as dedicated and committed disciples, we should listen carefully to the Dharma from our teachers and be sure to remember it well, without ever forgetting. This is actually the last of the 5 fundamental characteristics of a disciple, and it is a point that is also extremely important for us to understand. This is a core principle that we should all strive to practice well ourselves in our daily lives. To summarize, these are the 5 essential ways in which a disciple should properly treat their teacher or master. This is the 5-fold method of relating to one's teacher. To be honest, I sometimes find myself reflecting on this very thing as well. And during the entire process of relying so heavily on my teacher, the first aspect is serving the teacher, and I have also done my best in this regard. No matter how many years it has been, I've always put it into practice and done what I could. Then, regarding the second aspect, which is showing respect and making offerings, when I first started to rely on my teacher, I didn't have any available resources or offerings for this particular purpose. But later, when I had a little more, I also did my best without any stinginess at all. Then, as for the third aspect, I believe I have not developed any wrong views toward my teacher, nor have I caused any unpleasantness, nor have I disrupted any major conditions. Of course, there were absolutely times when I was criticized. That most certainly did happen. But sometimes it might not even count as real criticism. I've also mentioned this in class before. Sometimes when grew a beard, His Holiness would say, I used to have a beard too. In fact, Khenpo Sodargye also had a little bit. Sometimes I would deliberately take it upon myself to tidy it up. In this case, it seems the main reason is because when we are young, we are generally more curious. Besides that, I also think it looks really good too. But then it seemed that when His Holiness was unhappy, it disappeared. I don't know about our side. Do those people I talked about yesterday have beards now? No more, right? I saw 3 people have it, but today, not a single one, right? Do you have it? In these aspects, we can follow the teachings, or, as the Guru has said, do our best in these matters. The 5th point is listening to and retaining the Dharma, which I can't say I've done well. Still, I try my best no matter what. Sometimes I still feel quite regretful. At that time, as it turns out, many things weren't recorded. Back then, maybe it was due to the circumstances and various conditions. There wasn't any equipment, and on top of that, now aren't we recording the Gurus? It seems people are just like this. After the Gurus have already passed away, wow, it feels so important. At that time, we went everywhere looking for tapes, looking for recordings. But even then, there weren't many of them. And back then, for us. Just the day before yesterday, I found some old videos of His Holiness at home. But now, if we actually want to go ahead and play those particular tapes, no machine can do it. Because back in those days, the tapes were those especially large square ones. So now, if we want to convert them, there are still certain difficulties. So it's important to understand that sometimes there are situations where there is simply nothing we can do. Whether we are looking at this as students or from the perspective of disciples, there are 5 key conditions. Next, the Buddha told Shansheng, it is also important to understand that from the disciples' perspective in their relationship with the teacher, there are 5 fundamental principles that should be upheld. As was just stated in the text, Shansheng as a disciple, one should serve and respect the teacher with these 5 principles. This is what was just discussed above. And then in turn, the teacher also possesses 5 ways to care for and show respect for the disciple. As for the teacher, they also have 5 principles to follow. which they should absolutely use as a guideline for how they treat their students. Both students and teachers have their own important responsibilities. It's not that only students need to have a student handbook, while teachers have no rules at all and can do absolutely whatever they want every single day. That would be unreasonable. So what are these 5 principles? The very first point to keep in mind is that as a teacher or a mentor, one should guide according to the Dharma. That is, to follow the true meaning of the Dharma in accordance with its principles, to not rely on their own discriminating thoughts. If they themselves don't understand anything, and then just start saying whatever comes to mind, rambling nonsense. That's not how it should be. It should be done properly and according to the Dharma, following both worldly and Buddhist rules, since there are already established rules and regulations, and one should always act according to these very same rules in order to guide and instruct students, and ultimately to teach them the correct path. So for this reason, even in the secular world, we often talk about this very idea, imparting the way, teaching knowledge, and resolving doubts. This is what it means to be a teacher. First, in terms of being a person and imparting the way. In other words, this means teaching the established rules of conduct. This aspect must be explained to the student. Then comes imparting knowledge, what we now call knowledge, whether it's worldly or transcendental knowledge of any kind. And it's also about resolving doubts, which means actively helping students to clear up any confusion they might have in their minds. In fact, this is a very important step because every student is completely different. In some schools nowadays, it seems like teachers just stand in front of the blackboard and briefly explain some knowledge to you, and once that's done, that's it. After that, they never show any concern again, regardless of how the student is actually doing, or what their personality is really like, what difficulties or suffering they might have. These things are also ignored. What questions or doubts they might have, these are also not cared about. For an individual to be a truly authentic teacher, this is something that is exceptionally important. They should help resolve the doubts in the student's heart. As for students, when they come into this world, many things are quite confusing and unclear to them. They tend to have a lot of doubts. We Buddhists are the same way. When we first arrive, we have a lot of questions. But in the end, there are no more questions at all. Some of us Buddhists, for example, after 5 or 6 years, for example, even if someone has been here 5 or 6 years when asking questions, they're just like, they have no further questions. At that point, their doubts have already been resolved. Actually, in the beginning, there were too many questions. There are too few questions. Neither of these situations is ideal. For true Buddhists, study and research are still so very important. Truly developing one's own wisdom, there should still be some creativity. Didn't we already mention, for example, that in Israel, parents will very often ask their children, "Did you ask any interesting questions at school today?" Whereas over in Japan, they ask, "Did you cause any trouble for others at school today?" Parents always ask this. And in some other places, for example, they often ask the students a question like, "Did you finish all of your homework for today? How many points did you get?" Getting good grades might also be important. But what's even more important is asking questions. From a young age, everyone should be asking questions. For example, some students in the West, if you don't ask questions, you can't get credit. It's simply not possible otherwise. But in some places here, from childhood, it seems like asking questions is considered embarrassing. They're self-conscious about it. But actually, it's nothing to worry about. At first, Buddhists are like this too. Sometimes at night, I see many Dharma friends are actively asking each other questions. Everyone is in a very open and welcoming environment. They even debate with each other. Of course, during debates, at certain times it can genuinely sound almost as if they are having an argument. But you know what? That's actually perfectly okay too. In short, it should be that in the course of discussing these more important questions with each other, Sakya Pandita also said, when two wise people come together, they gain even more wisdom and understanding. Consequently, it is absolutely necessary for us to consistently maintain a more open and receptive mindset, and it is equally important that Buddhists also communicate and share with each other. Communication and conversation are very important. Some Dharma friends in our Vajrayana class say that we shouldn't communicate at all. Actually, I never said that communication is not allowed. Private discussions are all fine. But as for some tutoring, whether that's okay or not is hard to say. It's fine for us to ask each other questions and communicate. All of this should be allowed. Asking questions is still very important. Answering questions is also very important for our Dharma teachers and tutors. Of course, when you answer questions, if you truly understand, then you simply understand. If you don't actually understand and you deliberately use some technical terms in order to confuse others, that may not be very appropriate either. So generally speaking, as a teacher, one must resolve any and all doubts. It is important that all uncertainties in their students' minds are thoroughly dispelled. In the end, the ultimate goal is for them to develop a new, deeper understanding of the topic, of the true Dharma and the truth. This is absolutely essential for a teacher to understand. They guide others with the Dharma. This is the first point. And so then the second important point is to teach what has not yet been heard. So what should you teach them? Some things that they have never heard before, not just the same story you tell every day, telling it again today and again tomorrow, using the same teaching example every day. If you keep repeating it, in the end, everyone gets annoyed. Well, here we go again with this story. This is definitely still a bit of a problem. So, sometimes, like me, when you get a little bit older, you tend to get a bit more forgetful, you see. You forget what you said yesterday and start telling it again today. To be honest, I'm also a little bit worried that sometimes you might end up feeling annoyed because there are certain things people care about. They might mention them often. Of course, sometimes I repeat things on purpose. For example, with some concepts in applied Buddhism, saying it just once might not be enough. If you repeat it several times, then everyone can remember it. So generally, as a teacher, you should aim to convey relatively new knowledge to other individuals. Especially in this day and age, teachers really do need to keep learning, recharging, and honing their skills. Otherwise, it's not like before. In the past, whatever the teacher said, the students would just listen. But now in this internet era, things are different. If teachers don't like to study, students might actually learn even more about certain topics than the teacher. Then when the teacher comes to class, they might not know anything at all, while the students have already prepared for the lesson in advance. The teacher doesn't even need to prepare the lesson because the students have already prepared for the lesson in advance. In that case, the teacher really ends up looking quite embarrassed. So as teachers, we should also try our very best, whether it's for every class or every session, to bring everyone some brand new knowledge. Sometimes when I'm teaching, I also try to look through some books as much as I possibly can, whether it's teaching materials that I have used before or some that I haven't used yet, especially certain stories in particular, for example. I really do try my very best to share some of the core Buddhist ideas and some worldly principles with everyone, bringing some new perspectives. These new perspectives can still offer some benefits. If there's nothing at all to gain, actually, as a matter of fact, that is not allowed in Buddhism either. This is also not permitted in the Buddhist tradition. In ancient India, there was a naked ascetic called Nirgrantha. Nirgrantha was considered to be especially formidable at that time. He was skilled in debate, and with good spiritual practice, he went around proclaiming, "Whoever debates with me, I will have no problem at all." At that time, many of the Buddhist followers were actually quite afraid of this man. Sometime later, the great disciple Shariputra made the decision to begin a formal debate with him. Given the incredible depth of Shariputra's wisdom, there shouldn't have been any problem. At that time, he debated with him, but then he thought, if he actually defeated him in such a short period of time, it would be very hard for him to save face. He might not be able to accept it. It might not be possible to convert him, so sometime later he formally debated in the presence of the king, his ministers, and a great many people. The two of them debated back and forth for a full 7 days. Ultimately, in the end, Nirgrantha was soundly defeated. And so, after being defeated, according to Indian custom, he began to take refuge in Buddhism. When he was taking refuge in Buddhism, regarding his physical build, Shariputra was rather short in stature. He wasn't considered very tall, and his overall appearance was seen as quite ordinary. Because of this unassuming look, a certain naked ascetic was initially unwilling to take refuge in the teachings from him. However, standing right next to Shariputra at that time, there was another individual present named Upananda. Upananda was known to be a very good-looking man. He was also impressively tall and had a strong athletic build. So, feeling quite proud of himself, he thought to himself that the renowned Shariputra is said to be quite wise. So Upananda's wisdom must certainly be even greater. He also looks quite good and is a rather likable and respected teacher. As a result, he was so inspired that he later became a monk under his guidance. After ordaining, some time passed, because Upananda had already been a monk in Buddhism for 10 years, a very long time indeed. But later on, Nirgrantha came to have a great many questions. When he asked these questions to Upananda, Upananda turned out to be rather slow-witted. He couldn't answer any of them, one after another. At this point, the non-Buddhists began to belittle Buddhism again. They said, "This Buddhist is so stupid. He's been a monk for so many years. He's not as good as us non-Buddhists. He's really not good at all. Later, when this particular matter was brought to the attention of the Buddha, he then established an important new rule. This rule stated that for all time in the future, even if a person has been ordained for a great many years, if they are still found to be lacking in genuine wisdom, they are not permitted to take on the responsibility of having disciples. So for us, it's just a simple reality that some people may not be particularly wise, nor particularly well educated, but as soon as they go out on their own, well, they immediately want to start taking on disciples. At first, your overall appearance and also your speech might seem quite good. But when someone actually becomes your very own disciple and then asks you questions, you know nothing at all. At that point, some people might say, "You can't question me, I am your master." You can't say that to me. From now on, you're not allowed to ask me questions because you're my disciple. Don't simply question your master. This kind of thinking is incorrect. So the Buddha also said, if you lack education, wisdom, or other qualities, why do we talk about the qualities of a teacher, including when accepting disciples for refuge? It's the same principle. So it's fundamental that you have some form of knowledge that you can offer to other people. This is especially true in this day and age, where even seemingly useless knowledge can prove to be valuable. Even if you teach them a lot of it, they won't be interested. It should be knowledge that is relevant to their life and work in this lifetime, and is actually useful for their overall mental well-being, no matter what their current status is. Even if they are not very good looking, even if someone's social standing is not particularly high, others can still genuinely benefit from what they do. This point is also incredibly important to consider. The most important thing in the end is whether people throughout the world can actually put it to use. Sometimes we talk about history or about poetry. When we talk about some mysterious or profound things, very few people can actually accept them. But for most people, even now in schools, there is useful knowledge and useless knowledge. So what is useful knowledge? It's the kind that can immediately help you make money, like accounting and so on. And what is useless knowledge? Maybe for our development, from a philosophical, religious, or historical view, it's useful, but if you want to instantly turn it into RMB or US dollars, that's a bit difficult. It requires an indirect process. People tend to look down on those kinds of people. This is the kind of era we're in. At such a time as a teacher, when you are accepting disciples, you also need to observe and consider carefully. You should pass on to your disciples the knowledge they can actually use as quickly as possible. Of course, in Buddhism, whether something is useful or not is directly related to your spiritual liberation from suffering and your ability to effectively tame your mental afflictions. From this spiritual perspective, it is certainly a bit better. This is the second characteristic of a teacher. Now, the third characteristic of a teacher is to ensure that, according to what the student hears, they can correctly understand the meaning. When a teacher speaks to students, the teachings that the students hear should be carefully and thoroughly explained in a manner that allows the listeners to fully understand the correct meaning in accordance with the doctrine. We often say that we must rely on contemplation, not just knowing the superficial meaning without understanding the underlying reasons. It's not enough to just know the meaning on the surface, without understanding the profound principles within. That's not how it should be. If you are going to explain some Buddhist principles, then the theoretical framework of Buddhism, whether it's the overall structure or the framework itself, or to put it another way, it is essential for you to develop a deeper understanding of some of its extended meanings as well. Moreover, it is the teacher's responsibility to clearly explain these fundamental principles to the student. If you don't explain them thoroughly, in that case, the information you are trying to convey may just be rather simple and vague. These kinds of guiding principles might not be easily accepted by the students. During this process, you should provide students with more opportunities to think and to draw inferences from one case to another. In many different aspects, they should certainly be encouraged to reflect on things repeatedly. This way, they can develop some creativity. And then, you can also formulate some genuinely meaningful questions for them yourself. As a truly qualified and dedicated teacher, the progress that your student makes in both their worldly and their spiritual aspects will be quite substantial and noticeable. More importantly, the teacher himself must have a genuine passion for knowledge. If the teacher does not love knowledge, then what kind of teachings can he possibly pass on to his students? For example, if I, as a teacher, I am always very interested in doing business or engaging in social transactions every day, if such a person is teaching students, his heart is simply not focused on knowledge at all. This is a serious problem. This includes some of the teachers we see in the world today. Although they may hold the official title of teacher, when it comes to the actual practice of genuinely communicating and interacting with the students under their care, their primary focus is not truly on the essential tasks of teaching and nurturing their overall development. As a result, in these kinds of situations, the outcomes that will naturally follow are certainly not going to be very good at all. So the relationship between students and teachers, as we call it, is fundamentally different from relationships in other sectors of society. The main bond between them is still quite distinct. So what is the difference? Students should have a passion for knowledge. Teachers should also love knowledge, whether it's reading books or memorizing them, frequent debates or deep thinking. All of these aspects are necessary. If teachers don't enjoy these things, and students don't like them either, then the relationship between teacher and student might just be like that between a ruler and a subject. Or more simply, a relationship between a superior and a subordinate, and between a leader and those who are led. Other than that, neither side has any real interest in this area. To be perfectly honest, this is a very significant problem. Therefore, when it comes to the process of selecting a teacher, it is a very crucial matter, because a teacher's mindset profoundly influences all of the students' academic and personal interests. If a teacher genuinely and truly loves learning, loves the process of thinking, and loves self-cultivation, then at the very least, most of their students, it is highly probable that students will also develop a genuine interest in these particular areas. Therefore, this is also a very important factor. Moving on to the fourth point, which is introducing good friends. This means the teacher actively helps the student connect with suitable and positive friends. Because students are often confused, like they genuinely don't know who are good people and who are not. At this time, giving them, just as we mentioned earlier, we should give them guidance on which people they can associate with and which people they should avoid. If they interact with certain people, their future, their wisdom, as a result, various aspects of their life will be affected in different ways. The teacher should often talk to them with genuine and sincere concern. Some teachers just go up and give a lecture and leave as soon as class is over, not caring about anything else or the student's mindset or behavior. If they genuinely don't care about anything whatsoever, that in and of itself is also a profoundly irresponsible act. Therefore, teachers should often provide their students with good and helpful advice. Especially when it comes to choosing good friends and mentors, they should also offer sound guidance. Next, the fifth point is that all the knowledge that the teacher possesses should be fully imparted to the students, speaking with complete honesty and without holding anything back at all. As was mentioned previously in the Vimalakirti Sutra, a teacher should not keep anything to themselves. Some people think that if they teach everything to their disciples, the master will starve to death, right? So they are unwilling to pass on their knowledge to others. They worry that if they share all their secrets with others, what will happen to themselves? But actually, as a teacher, this really isn't a very good attitude to have at all. Personally, in this regard, I would have to say that having been a teacher for so many years myself, I truly and sincerely hope that before I leave this world, all the teachings I have received in the past, whether they are esoteric teachings or exoteric teachings, I'm eager to share them with those who are destined to receive them. If someone is not destined and doesn't want to listen, that's fine with me. But for those who are destined, I often think to myself that I once received this very teaching, and it has brought me tremendous benefit. So I will share it without holding anything back, as long as all the other necessary conditions are met. To share everything without reservation, this is actually very important. If you are stingy and refuse to transmit the teachings, only giving people what is taught in class is one thing. And then after class, you teach the real content to a select few, and this is for a fee. As a matter of fact, there are many such practices in the world, which are rather unreasonable. Using money to buy and sell knowledge, from the perspective of Buddhism, this is also, as I just mentioned, some reasonable arrangements are acceptable, but in a general sense, treating valuable knowledge and even Buddhism as commodities that are just to be bought and sold as a simple tool and ultimately just a means to make money, then the fault is very serious. One should have a very sincere heart, and all the wisdom one possesses should be fully imparted to those with whom one has a karmic connection, whether they are disciples, students, or friends. This is very important. Just as it is said in the Mula Sarvastivada Vinayak Sudraka Vastu, a disciple should have a respectful and obedient heart toward the teacher. As a disciple, one should have a heart of respect and obedience toward the teacher. By serving the teacher, one can ensure the continuous and unbroken transmission of virtuous teachings. This approach makes it possible for the student to truly receive these virtuous teachings and ensures that these valuable teachings can continue on into the future without interruption for all time. If one possesses such a mindset, so then as a teacher it is important that you will not withhold any of your knowledge. Now, if you do happen to withhold a lot of that knowledge, in fact, from the perspective of future lives, it is also disadvantageous. In the past, Kulapantaka, in his previous life, was also a remarkable Dharma teacher. But later on, because he was so very unwilling to share his valuable knowledge with others, he eventually became a particularly dull-witted person, Kulapantaka, which means small path. Therefore, for this very reason, one should be sure to treat one's students as if they were one's own dear children. This is also mentioned in the essential compendium of the Shakyas. The teacher should regard the disciple as his own child, and the disciple should regard the teacher as his father. A teacher should treat his disciple as he would his own son, and in this way he would never withhold any teachings from him. Likewise, the disciple would not regard the teacher as just some ordinary worldly person. It shouldn't be like that. One should always treat him as if he were one's own father. Then, as a result, there will be a genuine relationship of love between us. With such love, it is also undoubtedly very beneficial for him to acquire knowledge. Therefore, there will be no stinginess whatsoever. Not being stingy in imparting this knowledge is also very important. The Buddha told Shanxing, if a disciple, when in the presence of their teacher, consistently demonstrates profound respect, deep reverence, and dedicated service, then both parties will surely experience a shared and lasting happiness, and there will be no significant worries or fears to trouble them in their daily lives. Both in this life and the next, they will be very happy. So, what is this talking about? We have been discussing the relationship between a teacher and a student. Next, let's turn our attention to the equally significant relationship between a husband and wife. As a husband, it is essential that one treats his wife with profound respect. This means there should consistently be a foundation of mutual respect and sincere care for her. There are also 5 specific things a husband should do for his wife. This is something that is very important for lay people to understand. So, what exactly are these 5 things now? First, the husband should treat his wife with respect and propriety. As a husband, in fact, and especially when it comes to his own wife, he should not disregard her or look down on her. He should not treat her as a mere object for his own use. Like in the old days, for instance, with long-established systems of male superiority or explicitly valuing men far more than women, treating women as if they were simply a part of such a system, regarding women as merely servants or as someone solely for his own personal enjoyment in life, and not valuing her at all. This is unreasonable. He should treat her with respect. He should always be polite to her and make a conscious effort to show her love. This is really how they should be treating each other. This is the first fundamental rule for a husband to remember in his relationship with his wife. The second point is that a husband should maintain a dignified and solemn demeanor towards his wife, never allowing his respect for her to waver or diminish. We can put it this way. Here, dignity essentially means that respect and honor are truly not lacking. And as a husband, furthermore, he is also expected to demonstrate a great deal of respect and thoughtful consideration for his wife. And it is important to respect all the choices she makes, always showing a special and deep respect for her personal decisions. This applies in every situation, whether she is actively walking around, standing still, taking a moment to sit, or even when she is lying down to relax and unwind. He really should pay close attention to every single detail of it. He should absolutely never lack respect or dignity towards her in any situation. And then, as for the third party, for example, as a husband's behavior towards his wife, it is very similar to what was seen in the old traditional social system. Perhaps the wife mainly relied on her husband for her food and clothing. All of her necessities depended on the husband's resources. In this case, whether it's her food or her clothing, in these aspects according to the different seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, in different seasons and at different times, providing her with what she needs and creating the necessary conditions for her, he should indeed provide her with such necessary conditions. Now, as for the fourth party, their duty is to buy clothes and decorations for their wives, whatever she needs for herself, whether it's daily necessities like food and basic clothing, or personal items she desires like beautiful earrings, lovely rings, or stylish new clothes to wear, or for that matter any kind of bag, as well as all kinds of personal adornments, a variety of high-end luxury goods, and a full selection of cosmetics. It is a requirement that all of these items are made available. It is of the utmost importance that whatever she needs, no matter what it might be, is provided to her without any hesitation or delay. Perhaps that's how it is. As for the fifth point, which concerns entrusting the household, this is because the husband is generally the one who goes out to work, while the wife, in contrast, stays at home. And so in that particular situation, all the property and assets, she should have a certain degree of authority over them. There should be a certain level of trust in her. If she only has the right to spend money on groceries and nothing else, then that's unreasonable too. It seems that in today's society, there is mutual distrust between people. Everyone keeps their bank card passwords secret from each other. And in fact, there are all sorts of very serious issues like this. I've heard that when people get married, it's becoming more and more common that they need to notarize their assets. They have to go to the notary office and so on. There are all kinds of stories. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But indeed, society nowadays is rather unique in this regard. It seems that people nowadays just don't trust each other anymore. The level of trust between a husband and his wife is certainly not what it used to be. So, as the wife in the family, perhaps she should be the one responsible for managing all of the family's money. Back in my family, there wasn't much money at that time, but it was my mother who still managed all of the family's finances. As for my father, from time to time he would go out and earn a little bit of extra money. But even then, there was never much money. For example, I remember when we bought grain, we had to go every month. At that time, maybe we would spend something like 10 yuan or 5 yuan, and sometimes when the family really didn't have enough, we would often go to some relatives to borrow money. When borrowing, my mom would say, "We don't have enough money to buy grain this month." She'd ask, "Do you want to go?" My father always felt embarrassed about it, but had one relative to rely on. He would often go to that relative's house. After borrowing, he would always pay it back after a while. He was really particular about that. No matter what, he would absolutely make sure to pay it back right on time. Back in those days, money was really, really scarce. It was basically just an amount like a dozen or 20 wen or so. So in today's society, in some families, the mother is usually the one who manages all the money, while in others, it's the father who manages the money. But as a husband, you should have complete confidence in her and fully entrust the management of your family to her. This includes the family's financial assets and means many important rights should also be given to her. Otherwise, a great many things can become quite difficult to handle. So what exactly is this referring to then? It's about the 5 duties a husband has toward his wife. This is also something that is incredibly important to keep in mind. It's not about some so-called preference for men over women that some people have. It is certainly not the case that the wife has to do everything and anything. It's not like that at all. On the contrary, the rights and duties a husband actually has toward his wife are also clearly explained. Following this, the Buddha then proceeded to tell Shansheng, "Treat your wife with respect in 5 ways. This is exactly what was mentioned a bit earlier. And as for the wife, well, she should also show respect to her husband in 5 ways. So what are these 5 specific ways? The first of these important duties is to get up every single morning before him. This was a very common practice in ancient times, and perhaps even now in our modern world it's still like this in many places across the globe. As a wife, it was generally understood that one should, except for some strong women and big bosses nowadays. For most people, it's probably still like this. There are some feminists, some strong women and female bosses. In these cases, as a matter of fact, they have their husbands cook every single day. They are expected to get up early and go to bed late, as this is a strict requirement that is demanded of them. But for the majority of people, and this may still be true even now, especially within our Tibetan region, it is traditionally the women who are responsible for handling the cooking and milking the cows. They get up very early in the morning. It's rare for fathers to get up early to boil water or make tea. Basically, it almost never happens. I've seen that in places like Shandong and Shanxi nowadays. Many areas still hold on to these traditions quite strongly. In fact, in some places, it appears that even while the women are trying to have their own meal, the husbands and other men in the group are preoccupied with drinking and chatting loudly, while the women are still expected to pour water and continually refill the tea for them. It seems that in some parts of China, this is still the case. I'm not sure if it's still like this now, though. There are also many places in India where it's the same. So when we talk about gender equality, however, sometimes it's uncertain whether true and genuine equality can ever be fully achieved. We might say this is the case on the surface, but in actual fact it's clear that it might still take a considerable amount of time to truly get there. It requires time, right? It will probably have to happen gradually and little by little. However, in Buddhism, this isn't about favoring men over women. As a matter of fact, when we look at it from the perspective of the original social system itself, given that husbands in those times often went out for work, the responsibility for the majority of household matters naturally fell to the women. This daily routine meant they would have to get up well before sunrise to start cooking and take care of all the necessary things around the home. Then, after the man of the house sits down to eat. For example, she would stir-fry dishes and cook meals, and only after finishing these tasks would she sit down herself. Actually, in many households today, the situation is still like this. Now, as for the third point, as a woman and as a wife, it is important that your words are always gentle and that your overall attitude remains calm and mild. It is not always necessary for you to present yourself with the appearance of Vajrayogini or another wrathful female Buddha, and similarly, when you speak, your voice does not need to sound like the powerful and commanding roar of a lion. To give a well-known historical example, the wife of the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates was also quite famous for this particular kind of temperament. At first, she was really as gentle as a little lamb, and she seemed especially cute and genuinely kind-hearted, and her words were also particularly gentle. But as time passed, the arguments gradually became significantly more intense. Everyone in the immediate neighborhood and others nearby became quite familiar with this reputation. It is possible that in her role as a wife, she may have brought some suffering to her own family. So it is important that one should speak gently. As for the fourth point, it is essentially about respect and willing compliance. One should have a deep reverence and sincere respect for one's husband, maintaining a heart full of respect, and in addition also be accommodating. If you start by opposing everything he does, why are so many people unwilling to get married in this day and age? The fundamental reason for this, you see, is also quite clear. It's that everyone probably has, to a certain degree, their own so-called self-centeredness. And on top of that, each individual person has their own unique personality. At first, you might not notice it, but after a certain period of adjustment, it ultimately becomes completely impossible for them to continue living together. So for many people, the question is whether to go through with a divorce or not, whether to get married or not. There are all kinds of doubts throughout the world concerning this particular reason. Perhaps the entire structure of this era is different. The current system is different. Today's social conditions are different. Today's culture is different. Compared to the family culture of people in ancient times, in recent times there have been very significant changes taking place within society. This is especially true when observing the younger generation, and in particular individuals who are only children, as their personalities can often be very unique. Consequently, their general mindset and the culture they have been brought up in are quite different from those of many other people, including notable differences between the South and the North, as well as the East and the West. All of these cultural values are indeed different. With such differences, it becomes nearly impossible for people to be tolerant or genuinely understanding of one another's perspectives. Consequently, it proves to be very difficult for a great number of families to properly adapt to these circumstances. This might also be one of the fundamental reasons. But perhaps some of these life events are also a matter of karma. For example, why is it that some couples find it so incredibly difficult to get along and live together in harmony? I believe this kind of situation is also deeply connected to the influence of karma. In the Buddhist scriptures, there is a text that discusses this called the Sutra of Husband and Wife. In the Buddhist scripture known as the Sutra of Husband and Wife, it tells of a certain devotee, a faithful follower, who is mentioned as being a married man with a wife. She is truly very beautiful, wonderfully graceful, and remarkably dignified in every way. She is also known for being exceptionally wise and remarkably eloquent. On top of that, she is quite young, impressively talented, and possesses considerable wealth. She is considered to be absolutely perfect in every single aspect. However, as time went on, her husband, it was from that moment on that I really started to dislike her. He simply could not tolerate absolutely anything that she did. So, in the end, what was it that he actually ended up liking? That particular husband ended up falling for someone who was widely considered to be very unattractive, an older woman who was already quite advanced in her years, and on top of that was also extremely poor, living with truly terrible financial conditions. Despite all of this, he simply and genuinely liked someone exactly like that. After some time had passed, the husband really couldn't stand his wife anymore. Then his wife said, "If you really can't stand me, should I just become a nun?" Her husband was very happy about that. Sure. If that's what you've decided, go right ahead and become a nun. I would suggest that you also check the Sutra of Husband and Wife when you have some free time.
So she became a nun, and after ordaining, because she probably had a strong sense of renunciation at home, she later dedicated herself to practicing diligently, and through her efforts, she successfully attained the fruit of arhatship. After some time, the other wife of her husband, who was old and unattractive, eventually passed away. The husband then began calling for the bhikkhuni, his former wife, asking her to leave the monastic life and return to him. Of course, by that time, she had already attained the fruit of arhatship. She most definitely refused. She was simply not going to agree. Later, she told the Buddha about this matter. The Buddha then said, "It is not only in this present life that you two have this kind of relationship. Actually, this karmic connection goes back to your previous lives. In your previous life, your husband was also a highly respected Brahmin priest, a man known to be quite powerful and to hold significant influence. During that time, you also blossomed into a woman celebrated for her exceptional talent and profound wisdom. And so, when the time came that he first took you in marriage, that husband of yours fell in love with a maidservant. It was a maidservant who was particularly unattractive. Later, when their personal relationship had developed to a point where it was exceptionally close, the two of them conspired together. In the end, they tricked you into going into a forest. Then, as for your husband, he climbed up a fruit tree himself, and he selfishly ate all of the sweet, ripe fruit for himself, while he threw the sour, unripe fruit down below on the ground for you to eat. At that very moment, that woman, remembering her previous life, she said, 'Why exactly is it that you are giving me only the unripe ones to eat, and eating the ripe ones yourself?' Then the husband said, 'If that is indeed the case, then you can come up here by yourself.' Afterwards, he climbed down from the tree and then allowed the woman to climb up. When she climbed up the tree, he immediately surrounded the base of the tree with thorn bushes. Then he left. She was completely stuck right there, with absolutely no way to escape. While she was struggling there in a great deal of pain, a certain king came into the vast forest to hunt for game. He soon discovered a truly beautiful woman, stuck halfway up a large tree. He thought this was an absolutely wonderful opportunity. He brought her back with him to the royal palace, and it was there that she would eventually become the new queen. So the Buddha said, "The discord you experience in this life, the situation is actually not just from this life alone. So the question becomes, why doesn't he want to go along with you right now? This is related to your past lives. So for some of us, at first it seems like everything is going well to bring about this kind of connection, and the relationship is actually quite good. But in the end, things become completely incompatible, like water and fire. This could also be due to a variety of other reasons like these. Additionally, it could also be because of the various current cultural conflicts between individuals, including things such as a fundamental incompatibility in personalities. It is true that there are other external factors to take into consideration, but regardless, it remains fundamentally important for a wife to follow her husband's lead and show him respect. Moving on, the fifth point is to proactively anticipate what her husband wishes for. As a wife, one should always be able to anticipate what her husband is truly thinking about in advance. Before he even says a single word, she already has a clear understanding of the situation, which is a testament to how clever she is. This is largely because her emotional intelligence is so high that she can perceive the nuances in almost everything, especially given that they have been together for a considerable amount of time. She basically and intuitively knows what he wants to express and exactly what he wants to do. She can most likely understand all these things quite clearly, and in this way their two hearts are completely in sync with each other, because she knows what he is thinking, what he likes and what he wants to do. And then as for the husband, he also intimately knows what his wife is currently thinking, what she really wants to do, and precisely how she wants to handle certain things. Because of this, their personal relationship with each other is therefore also exceptionally good. Additionally, there are also 5 specific points for the husband to keep in mind, and 5 points for the wife as well. I recall seeing in the scripture known as the Madhyama Agama that there seem to be 13 specific points or guidelines for a wife, which I must say is quite a lot of guidelines. Then in another text, the Jifadu's version, it actually lists a total of 14 points. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of them. The husband only has a total of 5 points, but the wife has significantly more. This situation is quite similar to the differences in the religious precepts for monks and nuns. It's understandable that in our modern era, some with feminist viewpoints might not be happy about this distinction. Therefore, we will adhere to the version as recorded in the Durga Agama. This way, it's easier for everyone to accept. Anyway, the husband has 5 points, and the wife also has 5 points. This might be a bit better. So if you want to promote this in the future, Perhaps this version is a little bit more convenient for you, because otherwise, when a large number of questions are raised, you really won't know how to answer them, isn't that right? Additionally, there is another important scripture known as the Sutra of Yuye the Maiden. The story in this particular text is believed to center on the daughter-in-law of the well-known and generous patron Anathapindika. A substantial portion of the sutra is devoted to a detailed exploration of the different categories of wives. Some are like mothers. Some of these entities are designed to be subservient, acting as servants. Some of them are actually really just like one's own sisters. I think it mentions 7 types total. Of course, some people have ulterior motives, for example, something like wanting to take your very life, or in other words, being like an enemy. In addition, there are also a great many different types of wives that are discussed. In Buddhism, analyses concerning our social and familial responsibilities are actually presented in a very detailed manner. Importantly, the Buddha gave specific instructions to Shan Sheng, explaining that as a husband, one's duty is to treat one's wife with respect and consideration. In this way, between husband and wife, there are so many of the 10 points mentioned above. If the 2 people in a couple consistently treat each other in this considerate manner, then both partners should be able to experience a genuine sense of peace, living without the constant burden of worry or the presence of fear. When this is the case, both individuals will discover a deep and lasting happiness, and they will be spared from emotional suffering. So, when it comes to our families as Buddhists, it is important that we also pay very close attention to this. In the future, it is my hope that for many of our lay practitioners, the relationships between husband and wife can be substantially improved. Furthermore, all Buddhists should actively promote the essential culture of harmony in this particular regard. We shouldn't keep advocating, telling people not to get married, or insisting that they must get divorced. You shouldn't say, hurry up and get divorced. As Buddhists, there is no need to promote such ideas. Otherwise, if they get divorced, it will still be painful for them. Some people suffer greatly from it because the entire family structure has already been destroyed. All the effort put in over a long time ends up being wasted. Everything is gone. Many people can't sleep and suffer from insomnia for a week after getting divorced. Of course, there are a few celebrities and a handful of individuals who say that they are happier and more joyful after divorce. These are, it should be said, rather special cases. For most people, you see, it is still quite heartbreaking. And this is especially true for parents who have children. Long after a couple has decided to go their separate ways, there are still a significant number of individuals who are left to contend with a wide variety of lasting psychological shadows. Because of this, Buddhism emphasizes harmony above all. Especially for the great majority of us lay practitioners, as devout Buddhists, it is truly important that we should, as wives, try to be accommodating to our husbands, and we should always do our best to make every possible effort in all that we do. And as husbands, we should also make sure to treat our wives with genuine respect, serve them with a loving heart, and consistently treat them with courtesy. If all of these things are done one by one, then actually the Buddha has truly given excellent teachings to the lay people. His instructions should be considered extremely good. For us as monastics, we recognize that the lives of lay people are filled with many intricate complexities, and when it comes to the various kinds of suffering and personal afflictions they experience, we frankly do not have the same direct first-hand experience in these specific domains. However, we can often come to understand them through a variety of different ways. Sometimes they are indeed very pitiable and experiencing a great deal of pain. Therefore, we genuinely hope that through certain means we can offer them some support in order to truly utilize the profound truth and timeless wisdom of the Dharma to save the hearts of these people. Because especially when it comes to family relationships, they are extremely important, whether for our whole society or for the world. At times like this, it is truly important that everyone should pause and carefully consider what kind of positive culture and what kind of genuine love should be consciously brought into our daily lives. Especially the great love found in Buddhism, which perhaps transcends the narrow individualistic love between husband and wife. In this way, it is perhaps for us as followers of Buddhism, when the time comes, there won't be much conflict between each other. But because of the profound compassion and universal love that are central to Buddhist teachings, even individuals who were once considered enemies, harboring deep-seated resentment, can learn to fully accept one another's differing perspectives. This principle of acceptance is therefore all the more essential for one's destined lifelong partner. So in this regard, it must be said that everyone should also make some effort. Overall, and generally speaking, many of us Buddhists truly used to have poor family situations in the past. But after studying Buddhism, It seems that in many significant ways our overall mindset has truly changed. We find we're not as overly sensitive and certainly not as petty as we were before. We now tend to be considerably more tolerant and patient when dealing with many things. Ultimately, most suffering really comes from our own personal ignorance and attachments. Or they can stem from certain deeply ingrained behavioral patterns and habits. These are the fundamental causes and conditions that lead one to experience suffering. Therefore, everyone should also, as taught in the scripture known as the Sigalovada Sutta, strive to bring greater harmony and well-being to the entire lay community, especially in terms of the importance of getting along harmoniously with one another, whether we are Buddhists or non-Buddhists. As long as we are people who are truly listening to these teachings, we should all make an effort in this regard. I believe that many people should also be different from before and should support each other, whether it's towards teachers or family members. We should all be able to let go of our sense of self-importance. The main issue is selfishness and egotism. These things truly do harm us. If we can let go of these and develop a greater awareness of the difficulties and the suffering experienced by other people, then in many ways we can be more understanding and tolerant. That's all for today.
Jupun Solen
Bandangara Badma Sodargye Bandangara Badma Sodargye Bandangara Badma Sodargye